It's frustrating to say, but Max Verstappen's day of days at Suzuka, as he was crowned a two-time F1 World Champion, was overshadowed by the recovery vehicle controversy. Let's first of all go through a rough timeline of events. On lap 1, Carlos Sainz aquaplaned and spun out at turn 12, bringing out the safety car. This was partly due to the conditions and also partly due to the fact that the whole grid actually started on the wrong tyre. This is something that Jenson Button said during the broadcast, and also something that Sebastian Vettel talked about after the race. Even though the whole grid started on the Inter, it was way too wet for those tyres, and it should have been a start on full wets. Unfortunately, the full wet tyre just isn't very competitive because the moment any water is cleared, their pace drops off massively. So, to paraphrase what Seb said, the drivers had to almost knowingly go for the more dangerous but more competitive tyre, knowing that it was wrong in those conditions. At the same time as Carlos Sainz spun out, his crash brought a piece of the Rolex advertising board onto the track that somehow ended up on Pierre Gasly's car. This caused Gasly to pit for a brand new front wing and also to change onto the wet tyre. As the safety car picked everyone up, the field was still pretty condensed, as it was still very early on, and it was only Gasly, who was the lone straggler after his pit stop, that was pushing to catch the back of the safety car queue. As he came across the incident at turn 12, the red flag was brought out only about 2 or so seconds before he reached the recovery vehicle, which was already there to try and lift Sainz's Ferrari off the track. What's even more worrying, and something that I only spotted later on social media, is that there was also a marshal stood on the track as Gasly passed him. That's just a very quick summary of what happened, although I'm sure all of us have already seen all of the footage and all of the analysis. But at the heart, the biggest issue is the fact that in those conditions there shouldn't be a recovery vehicle on the track, and there was clearly no communication between the FIA, the teams, and most importantly, the drivers that there was a recovery vehicle with a marshal on the track at turn 12. There is a very important distinction that has to be made about what should happen. When a safety car is out, its job is to neutralize and bunch up the field into a pack of cars that the safety car driver can control. When the safety car driver has control of that pack of cars, he also controls and dictates the pace of the entire field, which gives marshals on another part of the track more time to recover a stricken car. The idea is that in the dry, if the pack of cars has to pass a recovery vehicle, the safety car can slow the field completely down. But when it's wet, to me that goes completely out the window. The circumstances around that incident meant that it was a miracle that no one else had the same crash as Carlos Sainz. Firstly, the visibility was close to none. Lando Norris was one of many drivers saying that you just couldn't see a thing, and then Fernando Alonso said that even when he was driving slower behind the safety car and past the recovery vehicle at turn 12, he didn't even realize that it was there until he saw the replay during the red flag. What's more, as I mentioned earlier, these drivers weren't even on the full wets, which meant that any sort of aquaplaning, even at safety car speeds, would have meant that one of them could have easily ended up going off. What frustrated Gasly is that when you're trying to catch the safety car queue up, you're actively pushing and driving faster. There is still a certain time delta that you have to keep to, so you can't just drive flat out, but Gasly was actively pushing and driving fast to catch up to the safety car when he arrived at turn 12 without any warning and went past a recovery vehicle that he couldn't even see. On Suzuka of all tracks, this incident brought back many bad memories because things played out scarily similar to the incident in 2014 that took the life of Jules Bianchi, who still remains to this day the last F1 driver fatality. On that occasion, and in similar conditions, it was Adrian Sutil who first crashed out with his car left stranded, and when a recovery vehicle was driven out to help collect Sutil's Sauber, Bianchi's Marussia, also at the same spot, left the track and collided into the recovery vehicle. Jules would sustain head injuries and died a year later from the accident. That is why this incident hits so close to the many of us that actually watched that race. In the dry, it's dangerous enough to have a recovery vehicle with cars going around at safety car speeds. In the wet, to have a recovery vehicle that even the drivers can't see just meters away is negligence and playing with people's lives. Not least of which the marshals who, again, I couldn't believe when I saw the video that the FIA approved for the marshals to go out on the track when there was another car still left to pass. In that video, you can see that the marshal, he sees Gasly coming and almost tries to jump out of the way in pure fear. The comparison to the Bianchi incident is what really hit me, because even 8 years later, and with all of the safety improvements that have been made, whether it's on-track changes like the introduction of the virtual safety car, or on the cars themselves like with the introduction of the Halo, it still highlights that all of that work can be undone in seconds if the FIA take for granted or take liberties with just how dangerous a recovery vehicle can be in those conditions. The FIA have a responsibility to learn from past incidents, but even 8 years later in 2022, F1 showed that they had learned nothing and still could and did make the same mistakes as the incident from 2014, which took the life of a driver. Going forward, a formal investigation into the FIA's processes at Suzuka has to be done, but when it's the FIA potentially investigating themselves, without any external bodies to regulate how they interpret their own rules, it's always difficult to believe that they'll be fully open to self-criticism. When the conditions are as wet as they were, which makes it easier for any car to aquaplane off the road uncontrollably, and when the driver's visibility is as limited as it was, that means that a different procedure has to be implemented. Extreme conditions like that require their own rules, and at the very least, if a recovery vehicle which could kill any of the drivers is being sent out, the teams and the drivers must be warned of a potential hazard. F1 got lucky at Suzuka because a repeat of 2014 was almost playing out in front of our eyes. There has to be some kind of accountability by the FIA and Formula 1, because if nothing happens, then this could just easily happen again. F1 proved that it had learned absolutely nothing from the last time an F1 driver lost his life, but the difference is that in 2022, all of the drivers were lucky enough to walk away with theirs.